An unearthly hello to my fellow horror enthusiasts, and welcome to the Writers of Horror podcast. The Writers of Horror is a community for horror creatives, a place to connect with other horror enthusiasts and to elevate your horror writing. Find out everything that we do over at writersofhorror.org. I'm Daniel Willcocks. I'll be your host for today, and today I am incredibly thrilled to have the wonderful Jonathan Janz in my clutches. Jonathan Janz is the author of over a dozen novels and numerous short stories. His work has been championed by authors like Josh Malerman, Caroline Kepnes, Joelle Lansdale, Stephen Graham Jones, Brian Keene, and Jack Ketchum, to name a few. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. It's great to be back.
Yes, I am very, very excited. And so for people that may not know, I had you on my... so I've had a transformation of podcasts along the journey. But back in 2020, so I've got down here 20th of March, 2020, you were on the Great Writer Share podcast, which is now the Activated Authors podcast, episode 27. So we had a whole big conversation then. So for people that want to check that out, maybe as a prelude to this, go ahead. But I'm definitely going to treat this as if we're carrying on from that 3 years ago.
That's fun.
And one of the first questions I want to dive into, just because I've been curious about this ever since I've seen it. What is Jonathan Janz-uary, and how do I get a month named after myself? Because I feel like you stole January, and that would have been perfect for me.
That is I don't know how that. I think the person most responsible is Mother Horror, Sadie Hartman. She, I think, coined Jonathan Janz-uary, and it kind of stuck. I still hear it from time to time, mostly in January. And I'm all for keeping that going. You know, let's keep that tradition alive. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I forget how that came about. Like, I think that there was maybe her book club. I don't know if it was Nightworms or another book club. They were reading a few of my books, 3 or 4 of my books at the time, like in a big group read, and I think they dubbed it Janz-uary, and I think that was the origin. I think
it's perfect. I love it. I keep seeing it all over Twitter, all over Instagram every January, and I'm like, that is perfect, but god damn it, now I don't know what month I'm going to use.
Well, you got 11 more to choose from. You'll find the right one.
I'll find maybe Dart or something.
There we go.
So for people who are unfamiliar with you and your journey and who you are, tell the listeners a little bit about where you got to, or how you got to where you are today, and what kind of stuff you do.
Well, that's a great question. I think that if you look at like the trajectory of my career, I think the common themes are gradual growth and slow improvement.
Yeah.
I've never done anything meteorically. I feel like it's the same way in every aspect of my life. Like I would have loved to have been an amazing, because I teach high school and junior high. I'd love to have been a wonderful teacher my first year, but I felt like I really gradually just got better at it and then finally got pretty decent at it. And I think the same thing probably applies to my writing. I have gone through every sort of rejection possible, and I think the idea of just keeping going, of just not quitting, of being determined and controlling what I can control, none of that sounds interesting or sexy or anything like that. But like, if I were to really be objective about me and my writing and career, that's probably what I would say.
It's very interesting. I was on a podcast earlier, and that was pretty much the exact same answer I gave. Because that's it. It's the only thing you can control is slowly improving yourself each time. And on that, so a question I always kind of struggle with, that comes around that sort of mindset area, is obviously you need to relentlessly keep driving and keep improving. And, you know, as artists, that's something that we, I think, instinctively do. And I know that, speaking for myself, I certainly can't stop. How do you know, because speaking on behalf of some people I've spoken to, how do you know when it's worth carrying on or when it feels delusional, if you know what I mean? And obviously I'm not speaking from a point of like there are people deluding themselves, but like it's a very tough line to tread.
Yeah, that's a great question. It often feels delusional. At least once or twice a day, I feel delusional. I think that you said it a little while ago, like in your question, you talked about not really being able to give up. I heard a great quote. One interview I use in my creative writing classes is with David Harbour, who's Chief Hopper in Stranger Things, really, really good actor. And somebody asked him what he would be if he weren't an actor. And it's a cool question. You hear people ask that of anybody from time to time. And he said that if he weren't, he said he's tried other artistic pursuits. He's tried to draw, he's tried to do music, he's tried to write, and he just sucks at all of them. He just can't do it. And he said that, but acting is just something he's good at. He said that if he didn't act on the level that he's acting, if he weren't in movies and television, he would be putting on plays in his backyard that nobody would see. And that really struck me, because I'm like, yeah, that's how I would be. That's what I would do. The parts of this, I love all parts of the writing. I mean, that's a lie. There are parts, there are parts of it that I don't love. I don't love writing a synopsis.
Hmm.
I don't love rejection. Nobody does. People say they do. I love it when people like say those things that sound good but really aren't true. Oh,
Hmm.
I love 1-star reviews. I love it when people rip my work apart. That's awesome. Please give me all the criticism. That's not true. No,
Yep,
you
yep.
don't. Nobody likes to be told that that's horrible. We know it's part of it. It's fine. It's totally cool, but it's not like you open a review craving evisceration. But I really think that the parts of it I like the most are just the coming up with an idea and the writing it and editing it. I would do that with independent of any publishing. I would do that. I would just have fun doing that, because it is fun. And it's not only fun, but it's like biologically necessary and emotionally necessary for me. When I don't write for a period of time, and there are times that I don't because of my teaching, it gets so busy and my family gets so busy,
Mhm.
I can tell like my emotional well-being is just not as it's not as healthy as it is when I'm writing. I
Yes.
just have that need to do it. I have that need to express. I have that inner it is. It's like a biological, emotional, psychological need. And so I think that's the thing. I think that no matter the delusion that I feel, no matter how much of an imposter or failure I sometimes feel like, because I do, it's that need that will always drive me to keep going.
Yeah. So navigating that around family life, I know that's something that obviously, a lot of people struggle with, and some people potentially find those conversations more difficult with family members and trying to, put in that time for writing. How do you find navigating that and getting that time when you need it? Because obviously you've got, is it 2 kids you've got and a wife?
3 kids and a
Three
wife.
kids and a wife. So
Yeah.
yeah, so even more people to try and work that around. How do you manage that and get that sort of time? And I will caveat and probably say guilt free, quote, probably not guilt free.
Yeah, no, I think the first thing is, and I can say this in honesty, but I put them first. I
Hmm.
think that's I try to. It's so I think one of the easiest things to do is to give lip service to the things that we know to be true, but the hardest thing to do is to actually live that, to
Yes.
actually put that into execution. And everybody, if you asked writers or anybody else for that matter, what's more important to your family or your career? Everybody's going to say family.
Hmm.
Everybody's going to say that. My family, friends, of course, that's more important. But then what do they do? Like, where is their time spent? Where is their mental, energy going? And it's very easy to let that get askew. It's very easy to let those things get out of whack. So for me, I do put my family first and my teaching second, because my students deserve the best that I can give them, whatever that is. And then my writing comes third. And that doesn't mean that writing is less important than teaching to me. I mean, there, yeah, I mean, it's like with teaching, you're directly affecting other people.
Yes.
So I have to put that first. And I alluded to this a little while ago, but there are periods when I don't write.
Hmm.
Like this past school year was the worst period of writing since I became a writer, and it's because my family was so busy, and I'm not going to shortchange that. And my teaching was so busy. I had a heavier load of grading than I've ever had, and my writing just suffered. I was able to edit some stuff. I did a little screenwriting, but like I didn't write any new in anything new in a novel all school year, which
Hmm.
never happens. That never happens. Usually I can write at least half a novel during the school year. Usually it's a whole novel. This school year, nothing, just maybe a little bit and a couple short stories. So I think that's how I manage it, is if I'm going to let something slide, it's going to be the writing. And I've finally gotten to the point where I give myself permission to do that.
Mm.
Um, because if I'm going to have guilt, that's the guilt I want, right? It's the guilt toward me as an artist, not guilt toward neglecting my kids or my wife or my students. So I guess it's like that you choose the most digestible evil and then you go with that.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that's well, pretty much in terms of the hierarchy of priorities, that hasn't changed in 3 years, and I love like that consistency.
Yeah.
And I'm very unsurprised from what I know of you.
Yeah.
So to be productive in this kind of hierarchy of obviously the things that are important to you and how it all works, you very much compartmentalize your writing time. You mentioned last time, weekends tend to be a good spot for you. Obviously, taking this year away, potentially not weekends, and then you've got sort of the whole summer to write, and then bits of editing in the evening. I don't know how I would go about compartmentalizing, because I find that I get very into a project and I will like just get hungry and fall into it.
Yeah.
How do you manage that and work that into your production schedule?
It's hard. It's so
Mm.
hard. Yeah, yeah, and it's like it's my system, but it's a very difficult system to maintain. It really is. I think when I ultimately retire from teaching, and we're not close to that yet, but ultimately when I do, I think that it'll be a lot, I mean, easier is the wrong word, but I think it'll be a lot more logical. It'll be a lot less piecemealed and haphazard and unpredictable. But yeah, that's the thing, Daniel. It's hard. It's so hard sometimes because you want to write, right? Just because you compartmentalize, just because you prioritize, doesn't mean that the way that feels and looks is easy to do or is pain free. I feel just all year I felt so antsy. I felt like I'm just shortchanging my career. I'm shortchanging myself. I'm shortchanging my readers. I'm shortchanging everything in that world. So it's super hard to do. So I guess, the way that I do it is to just like plow through, trudge through, muscle my way through it as well as I can, and just again experience the difficulties and the pain that are more logical to experience and the ones that I can live with. But just because I can live with them doesn't mean it's easy to live with them. It really,
Yes.
really sucks. It just sucks when you have to like stay away from projects. It sucks when you've created this. Like I did start to write a novel. I guess I lied a little bit. Over winter break, I started to write a new novel. I got about 15,000 words in and then had to stop. And I just had to stay out of that world. And it was such an alluring world. I could hear it calling to me. I finally gotten back to it here at the end of May, beginning of June. But man, it's hard because those things are, I mean, the faces of my kids and wife are more compelling, but
Yes.
it's not like these fictitious faces and lives aren't compelling, right? You
Mhm.
want to venture toward them as well. You want to explore them. And yeah, so it's difficult. It's just difficult.
Yeah, I really appreciate your honesty, and I think that's something that I definitely, that's one of the reasons I enjoy talking to you. You're very sort of just open about the experience. I think one of the things that drives me crazy is the amount of people that are like, if you don't write every day, then you're not a writer, and how toxic that kind of advice can be, because you're a perfect case study of someone who has an incredibly irregular schedule, but you still manage to bring books out, and not only just bring books out, but quality books that people love. I mean, what would you speak to that kind of advice, and if there was someone in that situation who has been hurt by that advice, what would you give them?
Here are two words that I'm going to get. These words have been on my mind a lot, and this is a little bit crude and crass.
Bring it.
There's no F word in there, but
Oh.
there's words here. Those words would suffice too. But the older I get, the more experienced I get, when I hear people speak in absolutes. Being a
Hmm.
Star Wars fan, I would say only a Sith speaks in absolutes. But when I hear yeah, just the other day, there, in fact, this week I saw on Facebook and Twitter both people speaking, and that advice you're talking about, that's some of the most, to me, some of the most damaging advice there is, because that's going to make everybody who's not a full-time writer feel like garbage. All right. And the people who give that advice, they'll say, well, you can find time, right? You can write for a half hour over lunch, and I'm thinking, what does your lunch look like? Like at my school? No, that's how do you figure that, right? Over my lunch, I'm grading papers. Or you can get up at 4:30 a.m. and write. Okay, so we're just going to forsake sleep. Okay, it's that easy. We're just not going to sleep. Otherwise, we're not a writer, okay? And on Twitter and Facebook, I saw these threads about, oh, this drives me nuts when people use this word, right? Or people will say this about, you know how there are different beats like shrugging or eyes widening or whatever, and people will demonize a specific beat and say, you're a hack if you ever use that beat.
Yep.
And the same thing goes quadruply for the advice that you're talking about. If you don't write every day, you're not a writer. Here are the two words that keep echoing in my head: piss off.
Mm.
What are you talking? Who are you? I don't care how successful you are. Who are you to tell every writer what a writer is or isn't, what a writer can or can't do? No, no. There are guidelines for writing. There are best practices, just like there are in any pursuit in life. But there aren't absolutes. Like the only, and you've heard me say this before. The only things I believe are don't bore the reader, and if it works, it's right. And I think those are good. Those are about the only two rules to which I adhere. And of course, I know the other rules. Of course, I know show don't tell. Of course, I know this and that. But when you start to go down the road of absolutes, particularly with like writing schedules and then guilting people because they dare to spend time with their kids, or they actually want to see their friends or their spouses, or they care about their main careers because, they want to eat and they want their families to eat. When you start like acting like people are somehow shirking their duties by doing those things, I think you're really being kind of an insensitive jerk.
Hmm.
I'm obviously not saying that to you, but I feel like people are just kind of lacking empathy,
Mm.
right? When they're saying those things, their lives might look like that. Their lives might be very conducive to spending 4 hours a day writing every day of the calendar year. Great, lovely for them. For most of us in this world, it's not that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the lessons that always stuck with me from, I mean, this was sort of early English classes, but I was always told never to start a sentence with and, but, or because. And the amount of books I have read that break that rule, and I break that rule myself now, but every time I do it, there's always that conscious little like, I'm doing it, it's purposeful, like I'm allowed to. And it's difficult. I kind of compare it to, when you're learning to play music, you have to understand what the notes are and how the piano is constructed. Say you're learning piano, how the piano is constructed so that you can then copy other people, get used to some of the rules. But once you know the rules, you can then break them to make your own music. And I think it's the same with writing, exactly what you alluded to there.
1,000,000,000%. That's
Mm.
not mathematical, but yes, 1,000,000,000%. That is so right. That is so right. Yeah, of course, it's great to study the craft, whatever
Mm-hmm.
craft that is. Yes, learn what usually works and what usually doesn't. Learn that something is not going to work 999 times out of 1,000, because there are things that almost never work. But in the right hands, like if you were to tell like writers, okay, you can't use most punctuation in your story, what most writers are going to create is going to be pretty bad. But if you look at Cormac
I
McCarthy,
was going to say, yep,
if you look at The Road, I'd say that book works pretty well
it's
without
beautiful.
most traditional punctuation, or at least quotation marks and stuff. That's a piece of art. That's beautiful. It's one of the most
Mm-hmm.
beautiful books ever written. And so, if McCarthy had listened to people and oh, I've got to adhere to this because I don't want to break this random, guy on Facebook, right? I mean, just think of what we would have been deprived of and how that work would have been diminished by
Yep.
following the rules. So yeah, I just and I the more that's one of those things I know in the abstract, but kind of like you, I have to continually remind myself of. Like I start to read that, whatever rule it is on Twitter, I'm like, oh, and then I just
Mm-hmm.
have meant no, what am
Yep.
I doing? Right? Why am I listening to that? Go on. If you
Yeah.
want to do your own story, fine. I'm gonna play over here.
Yeah. Well, some of the best books, I think, voice comes from breaking those traditional structures. I mean, I had a story very, very early on in my career that someone who was non-native English speaking volunteered to read through. I didn't realize what they meant was they also wanted to go through and proofread it, and it came back slathered in like red bits because they were going by the book English, and they were absolutely right grammatically on so many different pieces. But as I was reading through it, I was like, if I do this, it's just going to remove the character voice, their slights, any hints of individualism in that person.
Yeah,
And so I kind of very politely was just like, thank you so much. I'll take some of these because some of these like you have caught, but like I can't take them all.
right.
Mm.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I do want to dive back into craft, and I will very, very shortly. But I have so one of the questions I kind of want to throw at you now. As I say, it's been 3 years since we've last spoken. You gave us a lot of sort of info in the last interview about your mindset, how you got into writing, all that kind of thing. What's been going on the last 3 years, Jonathan?
I have been, I've been, well, I mean, aside from the family and career and stuff, I've been working very steadily, working on a lot of things. I don't know if I had started screenwriting back when we talked last.
I
If
think
I
you'd
had,
literally just begun touching on it.
that's it. And so I've been developing that, bumbling my way, stumbling my way through that, just like with anything when you learn, right? It's very
Mhm.
difficult, but I found that really, really fun. And I have been continuing to write novels. I've been writing some short stories and continuing to work and then trying to be less like a hamster on a wheel, right? I think it's really easy to like do, they say that if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always gotten.
Mm.
And so it's very easy to just continue to work with the same people all the time. You know, they like your work, you know what to expect and all that stuff. But I've been trying to like look around a little more and work with my agent and my manager a little more and try to work with some different people. And sometimes that has led me to places, and sometimes those have been dead ends. But I think that's been a very eye-opening and positive process, and it's ongoing. Like I'm
Mm.
in the middle of a lot of those situations right now.
Exciting. I feel like writing or the writer's life is pretty much just that anyway. It's just all these different open tabs, and every now and then you'll just pull one a bit closer until it's done.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, writing is open tabs. That's exactly.
If you look at my internet browser, it's just open tabs. That's just a perfect metaphor for my life.
I
Um,
love it.
Speaking as someone who's a bit new to this kind of space and it's something I'm looking at getting more into, what's the difference between a manager and an agent for an author?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. So I've got like a literary agent, right? And then I've got most people have like a, I think I shouldn't say most people, but people who have a representative from the film TV world. I think they
Gotcha.
often call that an agent as well. I call mine a manager, mainly because my friend Josh Malerman calls the same guy, our shared manager, a manager. And so Josh refers to him as that, and so I do. And I think that like an agent is more specifically, I mean, I don't want to like pigeonhole anybody or be
Mm-hmm.
reductive, because I think agents can be kind of all kinds of different. It's like a producer in a movie, right? A
Yeah.
producer can do so many different things, and I think an agent can too. And there are different types of agents with different working styles. I think traditionally, when you think of a film agent, at least, okay, so I'm going. Have you seen the movie Tootsie?
I haven't.
One of my favorite movies. Sidney Pollack, who directed the movie, plays the agent in that movie of Dustin Hoffman's character, and uh, he says, "My job is to field offers." And I think traditionally that's the view of an agent. An
Mm-hmm.
agent is the one who, you know, submits a work in the film world or TV world to a specific person, and then to field those offers if any offers happen, right? To just handle the business side. My manager, Ryan Lewis, I call him a manager, and probably Josh calls him a manager, because he's a little more holistic than he's a lot more holistic than that. You know, he's the one who taught me how to write a screenplay. We work on every word of a screenplay together. It's my work. He's very like emphatic about that. Anytime I try to give him credit, he's like, no, 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 no. This is your work. We're just talking here. I'm just giving you ideas and notes. But he's very involved in the process of writing it. And then we'll have all sorts of discussions, not just about the film or TV side, but about the literary side as well. He's very involved there. And, you know, so I think with that more holistic approach, where he doesn't just handle offers and doesn't just submit my work, you know, I think that that's maybe where the manager term comes in. And that's why Josh calls him a manager. And I actually think it is probably a lot more accurate than just agent, even though I'm sure there are agents who are like that too.
Yeah.
I just think it like really gets away from the traditional view of an agent.
Yeah. And also Ryan seems to be a bit of a ghost, at least to me, in the sense of the people that I speak to. So yourself, Josh, Michael David Wilson, all talk very, very emphatically about this magical Ryan Lewis. And I would love to have a chance to talk to him at some point. So I might start trying to track him down.
No, he is kind of like a ghost. He barely exists online. He's not on Facebook to my knowledge. I don't know if he's on Instagram, and he's barely on Twitter. Like he'll go months and months without. He's probably mentally healthier, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. What a life
because
that
of
will
that,
be.
right? What a life. So yeah, I think I think he's more in the real world than in the cyber world.
Hmm.
But yeah, he is. You don't. He's a very low profile guy. He's the opposite of attention seeking. Not that we're all attention seeking by having a life online, but he's certainly like not online much.
Gotcha, gotcha. I want to jump into one of your books because I'm curious about this as well because obviously you've written a lot of sort of standalone horror books. I mean, I'll personally laud books like Wolfland and Savage Species. I loved both of those.
Thank you.
Um, I have recently brought The Raven, and I've noticed that it's a book one of two, and obviously the second book, Blood County, came out at the end of last year, I believe. Blood
Yeah,
Country, sorry.
that's
Um,
okay.
what's the so in your head? What's the switch from writing standalones to writing a series? Is there kind of just give us a little bit of a thinking behind that because I'm very intrigued to know.
Yeah, this is going to be an uninteresting answer, but I think it's the right answer, for me at least, is that, the story, it's what, here's one of the reasons why my writing was so, difficult this year. I teach both eighth grade creative writing, and then I teach advanced creative writing for sophomores, juniors, seniors. And the majority of my course load this year was those classes. And I always tell them the story is the boss, which means that if the story, I tell them a 1,500 word minimum on their stories, because for some kids, writing that much is a lot, over a period of like 4.5 weeks. And they write 4 stories over the semester, my high schoolers do. And the thing is, though, is that if the story is the boss, that means it might want to be longer, right?
Hmm.
The characters might want to keep going, and the resolution might not happen until page 20 or 30 or 70. And so I get stories that are super long, and these kids just catch fire and they write like wild. And I feel like if they write it, I should grade it, and should give them good feedback. And so I really try to live by that credo, and I feel the same way about my own writing. So there are stories like Wolfland is one you've read, by the way. You're in Savage Species as well. With both of those, so far at least, I could see how there could be sequels to both of those, but for both of those, I felt like, okay, that's the way it should end. All right. In Wolfland, I'm not going to give away obviously which characters they are, but two characters kind of walk into the woods together.
Hmm.
And I really like that ending. I'm like, that's where it should end. That's perfect. I love the idea of these two characters. And I've had a lot of people read that book and want a sequel, and I could see it happening someday, but for now I just felt like it ended the way it was supposed to. And I feel that way with certain books. The Nightmare Girl, I'll be really surprised if I ever write a sequel to that, because I just feel like that ended where it was supposed to. With The Raven, it should go on. It needs to go on. And it's going to continue at least to a third book. And hopefully, like in my head, I imagine like 6 or 7 books. Just because I see these longer arcs developing. I see these new characters and new worlds and new villains on the horizon. I just see those things like down the road. So for me, the story is always the boss. And so I end it where it should end, no matter what it is. And I think that's what makes it hard for me sometimes when I write for an anthology, because I'll get an invitation and then I'll accept it, but then I'll look and it'll say 5,000 words maximum, but the story wants to be 9. And I'm like, oh, dang, what do I do? So often in those cases, I'm like trimming, reducing, and it ends up like 6,800 words. And then I just throw myself at their mercy. I'm like, I can't get this further, but it's so bare bones already. Can I please keep? And I always tell them, you don't have to pay me like whatever the rate was. You don't have to pay me above the word
Mm.
ceiling, right? You don't have to pay me 10 cents a word for 6,800 words. I'm totally cool doing those 1,800 words pro bono. But yeah, please let these words like stay in the story. So yeah, anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but that's my answer.
No, I like it because it's definitely something that I've kind of been looking a lot into the last few years. Because, as you say, most horror books, people die at the end, or it's quite a conclusive ending that makes it difficult to carry on for a sequel. So I've been doing a lot of digging into how people are managing kind of keeping that story going with those darker elements. And I'm not super far into The Raven at the minute, but from what I've read so far, it's got a very fantasy feel. Is
Yeah.
that the reason it's able to continue because it's kind of got that mixture of fantasy built into it?
I think that I've never thought of it in those terms, but I think that might have a lot to do with it. Yeah, the Raven, as you're seeing, it's really kind of a mashup of horror, of fantasy, of action, of adventure. It's got romance, it's got all kinds of stuff in it. And I feel like the grandeur of the world, like it's a pretty intimate, focused story, but there are larger things happening in that world that need to be explored, right? And that are eventually going to affect these characters. So yeah, I think, and when you talk about fantasy, I'm sure that there are fantasy stories that are very small and focused and intimate, but by and large, when I think of the fantasy books that I've read, they tend to be a little, yeah, grander in scope, right? So I think that actually might have a lot to do with why I feel the need to explore the world in such detail and, and to elongate that arc. Yeah, that's a really, I think you've just said something I didn't know. Really good.
Okay, I'm hoping that I haven't ruined the thought flow now by kind of drawing
No,
attention to it.
no, not at all. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. It's just kind of like I think that no matter how self-aware we try to be, we fall short of that.
Mhm.
And I think that when other people read our work, they invariably and inevitably find things that we do not and see
Yes.
things that we do not. And I think that's really helpful, right? Because
Mhm.
like you're coming from a place of good faith, right? This is just something you're noticing. So that actually improves my self-knowledge and ultimately probably will improve the story in some way.
Happy to help. Let's go into some specifics with horror because obviously this is a Writers of Horror podcast. We've got a lot of writers in the community. And so I want to ask you, what makes a good horror book?
Wow. You made me put down my coffee. Wow, what makes a good horror book? There are so many things that are important, but for me, it's characters. I think the characters are everything in any story. So characters first. I think it's the second thing, and this again can go for any story, but especially in horror, it's truth. I think that,
Yes.
and I think that horror, it just needs to be, when you use the adjective unflinching, I think that that conjures to mind like blood and guts and torture and sadism and an unflinching look at this or that. I don't mean it in those terms. I mean unflinching and looking at the situation as it is, looking at the characters as they are, the themes as they are, and just being honest and going there. And that sometimes means that you go to some really dark places, because if you're going to really capture, the human experience, if you're going to capture what we do to each other, then you're going to go to some dark places. So I think that your willingness to be honest and to tell the truth, I think that that more than anything else just naturally creates horror. Maybe that's cynical, I don't know, but
No, no, you've just given me an epiphany, so thank you for that. Because the last book that I wrote, that word unflinching isn't something I've kind of applied to it, but like the last book I wrote, it was no audience in mind. It was just catharsis. It was just I'm going to get these words on the page because it's what I feel I need to tell, and I'm going to tell it how I want to tell it, and that was it. Whereas a lot of the stuff that I've done before has had a bit of a commercial view to it. So obviously
yeah,
there've been books that I've enjoyed writing, but there's just been that kind of element of like not quite allowing myself to pour all of me onto the page. And there
yeah.
was something really, really just glorious, really, in the last book that I wrote, that I'm trying to like recapture in the current book that I'm writing. I'm like, there's just something missing, and I think that might be it. So thank you. I need to figure that one out. How, in your mind, has horror changed over the last 5 years?
It has become more diverse,
Mm-hmm.
which is great, which is exactly what needed to happen. I think that that's as it expands, it just, I think that's the thing. I think there are people that are afraid of being left behind or being afraid of being squeezed out. And I think that's a disservice to the idea of horror. The whole idea of horror is that it is for everybody. And I think that it should reflect that. And I think that in every conceivable way, it's not where it needs to be yet, but it's become more diverse, which doesn't mean anybody gets forced out. It just means that more people get included,
Mm-hmm.
and more people have voices and get to tell their stories. Or I should say, their voices were there, but now their voices are given a chance to be heard more, and they're given the opportunity to share their voices to a greater degree than before. And I think that's the biggest difference, and I think that that's only a good thing and only a healthy thing, and hopefully it keeps moving in that direction. And and I think that only is going to make it more interesting. One of the coolest things, my middle child, Jewel, I call her, but Jewel is a horror fan, and she basically exclusively wants to watch horror movies. And about 2 years ago, she decided, without my really pushing her, I'd suggested a couple movies that had subtitles a couple times, and she'd veered away from it a little bit, just because. And I think that there is that barrier to viewers in general. Like, watching a movie and reading subtitles is a different process than just watching a movie. I mean, it's just different, right? Just like listening to an audiobook is slightly different than reading a book. It's all reading and it's all viewing, but it's just slightly different, and it's all legitimate. But she got to the point where she was like, let's watch, it's subtitled, but it sounds really good, let's watch it. And she liked it. And then ever since, we've watched movies with subtitles, without any kind of barrier, right? It's like, whether it has subtitles or not is immaterial in her choosing a movie, which is awesome. um,
Mm.
and so it's really opened up our viewing to so many other types of movies, so many movies from different places in the world in different languages. And I feel like that's, so it's not that we don't watch movies from English speaking filmmakers, it's that we also watch movies, right, from Indonesia, and or from this country, or or that are in that language, whatever it is. And I just think that that's kind of that healthy breadth is what is happening, and it's still kind of in the process of opening up, and it needs to continue to do that. But it's awesome. So it's just exciting. It's an exciting time to be writing and reading and viewing.
I love everything about that. That was amazing. And so we've looked into the past. Where do you see horror going in the next 10 years?
Well, I think that's going to continue. I
Hmm.
think that it's not a trend. It's an improvement. I think that's going to improve. Um, and then I think also in the next 10 years, hmm, I think that, because we've seen horror and, whatever, books in general become more like in different mediums, and I think we're going to continue to see that. I think we'll see different combinations, like you're going to see more like video game, like more horror books adapted into video games, and maybe more, and I think, and you also might see things come back a little bit. Like, I've noticed lately there's this trend, I forget the name of the publisher, but they're starting to do like novelizations of existing movies, right?
Okay. Yep.
A movie that came out in 1992 will have a new novelization now, which is kind of fun and
Yeah.
cool, right? And so I think that, like, that kind of retrofitting is another thing that we're going to see more of happening. Um, I just so a continuing expansion, just in a lot of different directions. Audiobooks have obviously really boomed, and I think that that's only going
Hmm.
to continue. But then I think you're going to see some interesting things, maybe, because here's the thing: it's like, well, let me just tell you what I don't want to happen. Okay,
Hmm.
what I don't want to happen is the two letters that we're all hearing about,
Yep.
right? You know where I'm going,
I do. I do.
are A and I. And and I feel like, personally, I've been very happy that creatives all over the world seem to be like drawing a line in the sand
Hmm.
to say that, okay, it's one thing to use a technology to enhance something, like, thesaurus.com, that's a website, and that can help a writer come up with a better word choice, great, right? If AI, like, around the edges, right, whatever, maybe, because I don't want to be completely dismissive, but I think that most of us agree that should not be centered.
Hmm.
That should not take the place of any writer's livelihood. That
Hmm.
should not take the place of any screenwriter. That should not take the place of any cover artist, right? Which is, I think, where it's really, like, it's on the horizon. I shouldn't even say that, because I think it's right there knocking at our door
Hmm.
with writers, which is part of the WGA strike. But I think with artists, I think that's already really happened, where
Yes.
a lot of cover artists have begun to lose work because of that. And so, and honestly, I don't know, as I say that, I feel like I was even too diplomatic, because if I'm being honest, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I hate it, and
Yeah.
I want it to stay the hell away.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I was just because I think defenders of it would say, "Well, you're using this website, and that's technology or whatever. You're using a computer right now, and this Zoom is technology." Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So if that's the role of AI somehow to be used in a very very minor way, okay, maybe, but you know, I don't want it to ever do what I think, you know, this hyper capitalist mindset wants it to do,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, okay, if it can help us make more money, let's do it, right? Let's replace this cover
Let the
artist and take
robots work.
that.
Yeah.
And I hate that so much. I hate that so much
Yeah.
because cover artists are artists, and you can't take the place of what they do. You can't replace that human experience.
Hmm.
That's what art is, and you can't replace that human screenwriter. You can't replace. I'll shut up. But anyway, that's my point. That's where I
Yes.
don't want to see it go. I see it improving in a lot of ways, but that's where I feel like we're drawing a hard line, and thank goodness we are, because
Hmm.
I don't want that to kill art, which is what I think it could do if we
Yeah.
let it.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting time when it comes to the AI stuff and how quickly it's blossomed and how it's taken everyone. I mean, I've already seen ads for people that are like, write a book with AI, and it's like all the way from start to finish, and it's gross. And one of the things that particularly
Gross.
within, I know
Yes.
it's horrible. And literally, like, because my background's marketing, I'm like, you've made this advert specifically even more gross so that you know that I'm going to click it because you're um but like one thing that I tell, the people in the writers of horror, one people I tell people in my other writing communities is it really is now more important than ever to have that human connection and to really connect with readers in a way that is human. And I think, whatever happens with the technology, because obviously a lot of that's out of our hands at this point, I do think a lot of it comes down to just morality as humans. Like, where do we draw the line as people? Who do we reach out to? Who are our tribe that we're trying to bring in so that we can continue producing things that people value to the people that want it most? And I think it's a rocky time ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. We're in that period now, right? We're in that battle. And we have to. I mean, I just think we have to stay strong, and we have to be outspoken, and we
Mm-hmm.
have to be passionate about it, because it's like an existential danger
Yep.
to, because I've heard people like really trivialize it, and like, you know, people will like, and I get it. Their intentions are good. They're like, hey, here's something written by AI. Look AI. Look how terrible it is. And, you know, this is not a threat. This is never going to be a problem. You know, so I like the part of them that shows how terrible it is, how terrible an AI written novel would be right now. But then to go that next step and say, so you see, it's not a problem. We don't need to worry about it.
Yet.
Actually, yeah, we do kind of need to worry about it. Not because of quality. It's not about quality. It's about what people in charge could do with it,
Mm-hmm.
like how they perceive it. If they perceive it as a viable replacement for writers, it's a major problem.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if what it creates sucks. What matters is the people with the purse strings outsourcing art to it. All right. So it's not a matter of quality. All right. So yeah, I don't care if that thing sucks. It right now, we're seeing people, you know, kicked out of their jobs with it. It is a problem.
A great horror right here on the podcast. And AI is something I could absolutely talk for a while about, and I think that'll be a separate conversation. So I'm going to jump into a slightly different question, which puts you a bit on the spot. But what do you think is missing from horror at the minute?
Hmm. Hmm. Ooh, wow. That's a really, really interesting question. What's missing? I think every I feel like every writer that would ask that question would have some narcissistic internal voice that would answer, well, actually, this book I'm working on now, that's
More
what's
books from me.
right. That's what's missing from horror. But I don't know, man. I just think that I think that but dude, you've totally stumped. That's a great question.
That's
I'll
fine.
come
We can table it.
I don't want to table it though, because it's such a good question. I think that, okay, so here's the thing. I do have an answer. I feel like because we all have there are trends in horror, and a trend can be perfectly healthy and innocuous on its own, but then there can be unintended negative byproducts of that. Here's a trend: shorter books.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Novellas are kind of like experiencing a bit of a revolution, that's becoming more popular, which in itself is awesome
Mm-hmm.
because I've long loved novellas. I've long loved some of my favorite stories are novella length. And I don't have anything mathematical to back this up, but I've always felt like there's something very specific that you can do with a novella that you can't do with a novel or a short story. Like it's its own beast. So I look at like a story like Petey by T.E.D. Klein, a story like White by Tim Leben. Just there are certain novellas that are just killer and they couldn't be any other length. So while that is very good, that the novella is becoming, it's having its day, which is great. I do feel like that's causing some readers and maybe some editors to forget how immersive and delicious a longer book can be,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's not forget how awesome it is to curl up with a 500-page Peter Straub novel. Let's not forget how just transformative it is to pick up an 800-page Stephen King book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Doomadgee. Doomadgee is not a novella. It can't be a novella. It's got to be this long love affair, right? That you can spend weeks reading. And I feel like as a natural byproduct of novellas having their day, which in itself is great, I have seen a lot of readers online say, all right, I'm looking for my next read. It's got to be 75 pages or less, or it's got to be right. It's got to be 150 pages or less. And that's great if that's one or two threads, but that's like 16 Facebook posts I'm seeing in a period of like 3 or 4 days.
Mm.
Like, okay, or like all these TikToks. All right, here's your next read that's novella length or next, and here are 40 more TikToks like that. And again, it's like, okay, that's great. Let's not forget this over here, right? Let's also have this. Um,
Yes.
and so that's what I think is sort of missing.
Mm.
Is because honestly, there's some books. Josh, my buddy, Malerman, he wrote Ghoul in the Cape, and that's a big book. That's like 1,100 pages.
Yeah, I think you
And
showed us that on one of the podcasts. We had just a stack of paper. It's
yeah,
huge.
it's a monster and it's awesome. And I'm not, I mean, maybe it sold really well, I don't know, but I don't think that's gotten, I could be wrong. If it's gotten a mass market deal, I haven't heard about that or seen it anywhere. But that's one that needs a wider readership.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of those longer love affair books that people need to read. Like that's an experience,
Yeah.
okay? That's something that everybody needs to read. So yeah, let's not forget about those bigger books.
So I have a theory on the novella
Yeah,
at the minute, in the sense of, as you were saying, like on the novella, you're seeing all these TikToks, you're seeing all these different things. I mean, what is a TikTok? It's a very short video
that's
because it's
so
coming
true.
from decreasing attention from people that are like looking through things very, very quickly. So I think
Yeah,
for particularly for influencers, I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. This is the way that it goes sometimes, but I do think with certain influencers as well, novella is a very quick thing to get through, to get to the next one, to keep putting out content. I think there's a certain economy in that industry that lends itself to novellas, but like I absolutely like agree. Some of the books that stick with me, like Robert McCammon, Boy's Life, was beautiful quality. And pretty much most of what Stephen King has done stick with you.
yeah, yeah. And you know what? I like what you said there because you used a positive word, you used economy.
Mm-hmm.
I think TikTok in general, like I'm not being and I'm not saying you said this because I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon. Like I feel like that is part of the lifeblood that is giving horror so much
Yes.
energy right now. Like it's a really positive influence on the genre. Like if you go into any Barnes and Noble, most independent bookstores, there's like a TikTok table, which is awesome, which is good.
Yep.
So it is a really positive influence and it is doing some great things. And so yeah, it's not a negative at all. what you said is very true. Like in general, it's very digestible little bits of
Hmm.
information. I was making one the other day. I don't do it a lot. In fact, during the school year, I didn't at all because I was so busy, but I was going to make one about a movie. And I was talking to Jewel, my daughter, and I'm like, I'm gonna talk for about 3 minutes about this movie called Final Prayer, the Borderlands. And she goes, 3 minutes? I'm like, well, yeah, that's one of the lengths on TikTok. She goes, Dad's nobody's gonna watch a 3 minute video.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, I guess make it a minute. She goes, yeah, people might watch that. Okay. So I'm like, okay. So I think that like, speaking to what you're talking about, like the 1 minute is maybe people will watch 3 minutes, maybe not.
Mhm.
And again, I think it's just I love what it's doing. And there are TikToks about longer books, and I like a lot of my favorite book talkers do talk about like longer books too. So it is a good thing. It is a good thing. It's just I want to make sure. I guess to whom I'm speaking is not the TikTokers or Facebook group people. It's more the readers. The readers I just want to
Yes.
remind that okay, we can love novellas, but that's also love big books too. And it's okay to have preferences. It's okay to like one over the other. That's okay. But make sure we give them all a try, right? Because we're gonna miss out on a lot. Just as if I said, I'm only gonna read books over 500 pages. Think about all the things that I'd be missing out on, all the
Hmm.
wonderful novellas that I'd never read. So it would be equally egregious to dismiss shorter books in favor of larger books. But I do feel like if we're seesawing one way or the other, we're kind of seesawing toward the shorter
Yes.
book now, when we just need to just embrace all of them and love all of them.
Yes, I will say I've read quite a few novellas lately. I'm big on Cassandra Course. I'll shout around the podcast. Anyone that hasn't read her, like everything she reads, I devour. But I
Yeah.
have just started reading Daniel Krause's Wellfall, and it is a sumptuous writing experience. And that
Is
is
it longer?
it's about so it's a big book. So it's 9 by 6. It's about 300 odd pages. So I think mass
Yeah.
market probably about
Yeah.
350, 400 pages.
Yeah.
And it is you lose yourself in it. It's just fantastic. So yeah, I feel yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I read Living Dead, I think was a Daniel Krauss, George Romero. Really
Yes.
loved it, and that's a longer book. So I love all the lengths, right? They're
Hmm.
all good.
All
And I just
books.
want to make sure well, all books. Let's just all keep loving all books.
Yeah.
That's my only wish. Yeah.
We are coming close to time, so I have one more main question for you before we wrap it up. And again, not to put you on the spot, but for people who may be new into horror, who are 3 authors that they should read, and do you have specific books for them?
Yeah. This is the only hard part about this is not mentioning my friends, because I don't want to mention my friends because they're my friends, but I don't want to not mention my friends because they're my friends,
Yes.
right? So, three people that Geez. Well, the first one I would go to is the most obvious, and that's Stephen King, because
Mhm.
he's the one who got me into writing and reading and everything. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention him. Um, a couple other people I would read. I'm just gonna go with I've already talked about Josh's stuff, which I absolutely love. So since I've already pimped his work, let me say Tananarive Due.
Mm.
I'm gonna say she's somebody that you should really be reading. I love Ghost Summer is a great place to start with her work. Anything by her you read is gonna be amazing. So Tananarive Due, Ghost Summer, Stephen King, I would say to read okay, read N, the novella, because I want to go with different lengths
Ooh,
here. Like
okay.
Ghost Summer is a collection of stories. N is a novella by Stephen King. So read both of those. And then the third rec I would give would be I'm gonna go Brian Keene.
Mm.
He's one of those, he's almost like a Jack Ketchum kind of writer, that like he's canonical, like he's part of the canon, but so much so that people almost forget about him now.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that, I'm sure he still sells plenty of books, but you just don't, he's not the fresh, new, sexy flavor of the month, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna say Brian Keene, and I would say to read a story called Ghoul, which is a wonderful coming of age book. So there are a lot of wonderful places to start with horror, but you wouldn't be badly served by starting with those 3 books.
Amazing suggestions. Awesome. And to round off, I will say, where can people find out all about yourself and everything you've got going on?
Yeah, unlike Ryan, as we talked about, who's kind of a ghost, I am the opposite of that. I'm very easy to find, I think. So I am on Twitter as Jonathan Janz, Instagram is Jonathan.Janz. I'm on Facebook as Jonathan Janz. I'm on TikTok, Jonathan Janz or Jonathan.Janz something. I am on Goodreads sometimes. You can find my books anywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores, wherever. And my newsletter, if you go to my website, jonathanjanz.com, jonathanjanz.com, there is a sign up thing there. If you go to like menu and newsletter, you can sign up for my newsletter there. I don't do a lot of newsletters. I probably do like 2 a year, 3 a year. So usually they're full of information. I just don't have time to do more. I would love to do a newsletter every week like Brian Keene. I just don't, I'm not able to keep up that with that pace. So yeah, sign up for that if you would like to get information like that's new and fresh and first. The newsletter is a great place.
I'll put links for all of that in the show notes. Jonathan, it's been wonderful catching up with you again, and I'm excited to see where you go in the future.
Hey, thank you, brother. I super appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. You do a wonderful job. Love your, I love this whole thing. It's just a blast.